This happened to me while I was abroad studying. I stayed at a house nearby the school and everything was fine, until it wasn't. To make the story short, me and other tenants got kicked gracefully and in the need of a new place to stay. Shouldn't be so hard. I mean, there's literally a sign of room for rent across the street, said the other guy. Sure, but the rent is higher, I answered. I didn't want a roomie, so I searched on my own, and after a parade of rooms for rent and a myriad of scary places, I finally found the perfect place to rent. The price was slightly higher than my previous lease, but it had so many advantages. First, it was so close to my faculty that I could wake up, dress, and reach my classroom in 10 minutes. I had a bathroom for myself. If you've never had a roomie and is the kind of person who is a messy human, you can bet that cleaning the toilet will be a nightmare. And the space wasn't terrible. The only drawback I could think about is that the room was beside the room of my landlady, so having girls come by was an awkward experience. After settling down on my room, the landlady told me that she would sleep a little late because she has insomnia, and I shouldn't mind the sounds of the night, and if this would bother me, she could change my lease to another room, which had no bathroom and I would need to share with another 2 guys. I told her it was okay. Heck, she could play a friggin' death metal concert before I would consider to move to a place with a shared bathroom. The room I was renting came with some furniture, a small desk and a chair, plastic like the ones we use on parties and general street food business, a small wardrobe, a night table with a drawer, and a bed. Everything was great despite the increase of payment of rent. I had a scholarship, but I had to make a couple sacrifices when it came to entertainment, even on the first night of sounds. Tap, 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 tap. It sounded like the landlady was playing with a ball, but it was like one of those to relieve stress, so the sound was muffled when the hits would strike. A couple weeks went by after the first time, and the variety of sounds went from a ball, a TV changing channels, something that sounded like a toy car, what sounded like a chair with its wheels racing through a hallway, a door creak, and on week 3 a child laugh sounded in the landlady's room. It wasn't a maniacal laugh, nor a creepy one, just a kid's giggle. I thought the woman had a nephew or a grandchild that was always with her and demanded attention, so I thought, everything checks, and moved along, until week 4. I remember perfectly the event because it scared me for a different reason. The place where I lived was prone to earthquakes, so it wasn't unusual to get a gentle shake on a sudden time, and when the wardrobe door opened, slowly accompanied with a creak, my reaction was, great, an earthquake at this time of the day. I went out of my room and into the street to be ready in case the quake would be strong, but nothing happened, so I went back. Weekend of the 4th week was the second time I should realize things were wrong, because that Saturday I woke up in the middle of the night. I was as drowsy as confused, so at first I didn't notice the knocking on the wall that the landlady and I shared because it's concrete and it wasn't that noisy, but still I heard it. Great, the brat knows that this room is occupied and wants to play, I thought. As I was checking the time on my cell phone, the creak of the door startled me. It was my wardrobe again. Now at this point you may think, bruh, this sounds lame. You just realized the wardrobe door moves. Get out of there. Well, it's not. When I first moved to the place, I noticed the door movement. It was a poor woodwork or just age, I don't know. But my solution to the issue was to use either a lab coat or a dirty cloth to stick the door, and it would work, up until now. Time went by, and after 3 months, I started considering asking the landlady about changing my room because it became a routine, the knocking on the wall on a Saturday night. Good morning, can I ask you something? I saluted the landlady, who looked worried as I approached her. What is it? She said nervously. Well, I hear a knocking on the wall during Saturday nights. Could you please stop? It started to wake me up in the middle of the night. Will do. The woman smiled and went on with her activities. On Friday night next week, I had company over. a friend of mine, and I were watching a movie and fooling around when all of a sudden a blackout shut down the lights and a giggle sounded in the room of the landlady. My friend got quite jumpy and asked me if this was normal. Meh, it's just the landlady, nephew, or grandchild, I don't know. When the lights came back on, we weren't in the mood anymore to watch the movie, so we just went to sleep. On Saturday, I woke up again, but there was no knocking on the wall. In front of the wardrobe, I could see the silhouette of a kid using a raincoat and boots so high on his knees that they were covered. The child was apparently staring at the open piece of furniture and completely still. As I was barely awake, I thought it was an illusion. The kid couldn't get into my room. There's only one way to get in, and I closed it. A couple seconds pass when my mind starts working again, so I decide to ask, "Hey kid, what are you doing?" No words came out of my mouth before the kid jumped into the wardrobe and abruptly closed the doors. A chilling sensation came to me all of a sudden, and I decided to grab my pants and shoes and run out of the room. I guess it was around 2 or 3 a.m. because a local taco place was open, so I stayed there for a while, still in shock of what happened when I saw a couple of guys come into the place. They were the people renting the other rooms from my landlady. We met eyes, and I guessed I was shaking or pale as a ghost because they came close and asked me, "You're the guy who rents the small room, right?" I nodded. "Is it true that there's a ghost? We met a guy before you, like 2 tenants ago, and he told us that the room was haunted." "You mean the sounds the landlady makes? She has insomnia, you know," I answered, clinging to skepticism. "We haven't heard her at all," he told me as he was staring at his companion. I wanted to tell them about the situation, but I wasn't sure if I was more scared of the chance of being mocked or for the fact that I watched a ghost jump inside my closet. We kept chatting about random stuff, and then they asked again and again about the situation, but I simply denied it and tried to keep them there so I wouldn't be alone. We went to a local store and grabbed a couple beers and chatted like old friends until dawn. I said goodbye to the guys and went back to my room, packed everything I could, I didn't touch the wardrobe, and told the landlady I was leaving. She seemed to understand as she accepted my departure and told me that my deposit would be available next week. I stayed with a friend for a couple days before finding another place to live. I did come back to get my deposit, and the landlady handed over a couple things that I left. I simply said, "How clumsy of me," and left and never looked back, hoping I would never see again a ghost in my life. I recently graduated from CDL school and decided to get a job relating to my field. After applying to every job that involved driving large vehicles that I could find, I got a reply about an hour later for a bus driver position at Frederickson High School. The message read, "Hello, George. We have reviewed your application and have decided you would be a perfect fit for our position. Your first day will start tomorrow. Your bus's number is 458 and is located at a bus yard on 207 Riverside Street. You can arrive at the bus yard at any time, but please arrive at the school before 4 a.m. This is when the students get dismissed. Once the students enter the bus, you can then deliver them to their 5 stops on Old Military Road. Ernest Frederickson, principal of Frederickson High School." I was a bit confused on why there was no interview, but nevertheless, I took the job anyway, not wanting to look at what I thought was a gift horse in the mouth. I also thought it was weird that the school hours take place during the night, but I assumed that this school operated 24 hours a day, dividing students and teachers into 4 groups for each shift to follow social distancing guidelines, or just for efficiency in general. Around 3:15 a.m., I got into my rusty 1974 Ford F-250 and drove to the address listed in the message. It wasn't that far away, about a 15-minute drive. I arrived at a vehicle gate next to a guard shack. The bus yard consisted of a flat slab of dirt with several buses parked at the back, with a large space in the front to allow for maneuvering the buses into the spots. Surrounding the yard was a fence, with the aforementioned gate, a shack replacing part of the fence. The guard in the shack was startled by my arrival and proceeded to open the window slowly. Who are you?" he asked. Hello?" I replied. "I'm George Redwood. I'm here for the bus 458. Are you okay?" He picked up a piece of paper, looking at it briefly before putting it down. He then passed me a key I presumed was for my bus. "Okay, sir, here's your key. Find your bus and replace its parking spot with your truck. Then you can go." The gate then opened, and I did as he asked. I drove my truck through the gate, got out to find my bus, and then drove my bus to the front of the yard and parked it in a corner. I then walked back to my truck and parked it in my bus's original spot before going back to the bus and driving it back to the gate. My bus was one of those buses with the flat front, engine in the back, and had the driver in front of the front wheels. I don't know what the original name of this design is. I noticed that the bus was given had many dents and scratches, mostly on the front bumper, but I didn't think too much of it and started my shift anyway. I arrived at school at 3:47 a.m. I noticed that there was only one bus for the school, that being mine. This school was very small, so it made sense why there was only one bus. While I waited for the students to be dismissed, I found a list of rules along with a map in the gap between the steering wheel and the windshield. Rules for Frederickson High School busing. You must follow these rules when driving on Old Military Road. We cannot ensure your safety if you break any of these rules. Number 1. Do not use any electronic devices for navigation. They will try to deceive you. We've printed out a map for you to follow. Number 2. The bus stops you can drop kids off are labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. These stops resemble a bench with 3 walls with a roof, with the opening being on the front. The bus stop's number will be on both sides of all 3 walls. If you stop at a bus stop that is not one of the above, leave the stop immediately and continue your journey. Try not to look at anything nearby a fake stop, besides checking a wall to see if it's a valid stop. Number 3. The road is supposed to be very old, windy, and unmaintained. If the road suddenly changes to a straight road that appears to be newly paved, and the scenery starts repeating, immediately slam on the brakes and turn around before it's too late. Once the road starts curving again and the straight part is no longer visible, you can turn around and continue your journey. If turning around is not possible, shift the bus into reverse and drive until either you find a place to turn around or the road returns to normal. Number 4. If the road reaches a dead end, turn around or reverse until the end of the road is no longer visible, similar to rule number 3. Rule number 5. If the road merges with another road, remember which side you came from. This will be important if you have to turn around. Do not drive on the road you did not come from. Rule 6. If any other vehicles appear on the road, disable them by any means possible. I don't care about minor damage to the bus. You can easily bash through any cars or light trucks, but be careful around larger vehicles that could put up a fight. Do not drop off any students if your bus is currently being pursued by any vehicles, or you disabled one recently and it crashed near a bus stop. Rule 7. If your bus gets stuck for whatever reason, alert the students. They'll know what to do. There is a handgun in a gloved compartment near the steering wheel. Use it to defend the bus if they attempt to get in. Wait in the bus until dawn, then contact us to get you out of there. No pay will be deducted if this happens. Rule 8. If you hear a church bell, avoid going towards the source. If it's behind you, you're good. If it's on your side or in front of you, turn around and get as far away as you can until the ringing stops. Once you can no longer hear the bell, you can turn around and continue your journey. This usually doesn't last long. Rule 9. If you see a creature on your right running parallel to your bus, do not under any circumstances open any doors or windows. While it will always run at the speed of your bus, you can confuse it by constantly accelerating and decelerating. Doing that may allow you to get into a position in which you can run it over. This is the only known way to stop it. Rule 10. If the engine stops for seemingly no reason, immediately start it up again and floor it. Do not look at what is behind the bus. If that doesn't work, refer to Rule 7 for everyone's safety. If you see a human on the road, run it over, even if it resembles a loved one. It's not a human. If you fail to run it over, skip any remaining stops and return to the bus yard as quickly as possible. Do not, under any circumstances, open any doors or windows. If you have to turn around for whatever reason, do so as quickly as possible. Despite the fact that you likely won't see it again, it is still following you. Once you arrive at the bus yard, alert the guard. They'll know what to do. Rule 12. If you see a mansion in the distance, turn off all lights and floor it. None of our students live there. Its position on the road changes often, sometimes not appearing at all. The owners are deaf, but they can still see. The part of the road directly in front of the mansion is straight, and you can turn your lights back on once you're surrounded by forests again, so you'll be fine. This mansion is at least twice as tall as the forest and emits light from the rooms, so if you pay attention, you can spot it from far enough away that you can turn off your high beams and headlights before they notice the light. If you see a ridiculously bright light behind you, they saw you. If this happens, put on the modified sunglasses in the glove compartment and get out of there as quickly as possible. The students are prepared with similar sunglasses to prevent being blinded by this light, so don't worry about them. If you are forced to turn around, for whatever reason, do it as quickly as possible. Do not drop off any students when the owners are chasing you, and return to the bus yard if necessary. When the light disappears, you've lost them and can continue your journey. Keep all doors and windows closed during this. Rule 13. The true end of this road merges with a larger road at a three-way stop. If any students are still in the bus once you've passed all 5 stops, go back to the front of the road and try again. Keep doing this until all students have reached their stops, or if you get too tired, to continue. I was very confused on what to think of this. Sure, it sounds impossible, but as a longtime lurker of this subreddit, I know I should take these rules seriously. Nevertheless, I continued waiting for the students to be dismissed and came up with a plan. I would follow the rules unless they could potentially harm someone if they are fake, such as the vehicle ramming. If I can prove a rule to be true without breaking any of them, I will assume they are all real and follow them all. At 4 a.m., the students exited the school and got on my bus. I estimated that 20 students entered the bus, about 80% capacity under the social distancing guidelines. Despite the situation, most of the students were very chill, as if they've been going to the school for so long this stuff doesn't scare them anymore. Once all the students entered the bus, I closed the doors and got on the road. The road was a 2-lane, windy road through a forest. Though it was paved, it looked like it hasn't been maintained for decades, with the potholes poorly patched with tar. The pothole fillings looked like chunks of the first road Lightning McQueen paved in cars. Roads like this are nothing unusual here in upstate New York. The first 10 minutes were uneventful, and I dropped off 3 students at one stop with no complications. That was until I heard a student scream, "They're here." I looked in the left mirror, and sure enough, I saw a pair of headlights in the distance. Rule number 6. If any other vehicles appear on the road, disable them by any means possible. I accelerated the bus, but the pair of headlights accelerated faster. It caught up to me in a matter of seconds and started tailgating me. It got so close that the headlights were no longer visible from the rear window, but I still knew it was back there. "What is happening?" I yelled to the students. Even though I knew exactly what was going on, I was still hoping this was all a joke. Several students replied at once, but I couldn't decipher what any of them were saying. "Should I brake check the vehicle?" Every student replied yes, so I did. I slammed on the brakes, causing my bus to come to a halt within seconds. I heard tires screeching coming from both vehicles, shortly followed by a loud crunch from the back of the bus. I then accelerated the bus, looking out the rear window to see the vehicle behind me has stopped chasing me. A collision at that speed must have broken something important under the hood, as we were going 60+ miles per hour at the time of the collision. About a minute later, I arrived at stop 2. 2 students got up, a boy and a girl, so I assumed I was far enough away from the other vehicle to drop them off. I opened the doors and they were about to step off until we noticed our mistake. This wasn't stop 2. It was stop Z. Rule number 2. The bus stops you can drop kids off at are labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. If you stop at a bus stop that is not one of the above, leave the stop immediately and continue your journey. I immediately sped off, closing the doors while the bus was already moving. The 2 students were still at the front of the bus, grabbing the railing to avoid falling due to the dramatic acceleration. Not even a second after I closed the doors, I heard demonic screeching from my right. "Driver, look," one of the students yelled. She was pointing out the doors, revealing that something managed to get part of itself wedged between the doors. As I had to focus on the road, I didn't have much time to look at it, but I was still able to catch a glimpse of whatever she was pointing at. It looked like an arm of a massive gingerbread man, except it reflected no light. I could hear whatever that arm was attached to being dragged across the asphalt, sounding like a mix of wood and metal. I briefly opened the doors, causing the creature to lose its grip and fall to the ground. "What the heck was that?" I asked the students, who were still on the staircase. "I don't know," replied the female student. "I've seen that thing a few times. The fake bus stop is fairly uncommon. It usually happens at least once a month, but the creatures usually don't get to the bus in time anyway." The male student returned to his seat. This event somehow made me come up with a question for the female student. "Actually, how long have you lived here?" "I've lived here since I was a baby. Every house here has its own set of weird rules, but it's all my family could afford, so we've been living together ever since." "Oh, and what's your name?" she added. "George. And you?" "Angela." "Oh, okay. Would you mind staying up here so we can—" "This is the police. Stop your vehicle immediately," a masculine voice yelled through the megaphone. The voice sounded like a pathetic attempt of mimicking a human. It sounded like the sentence was put through text-to-speech software and blasted out of a megaphone. I was so into my conversation with Angela that I was completely oblivious to the police cruiser in the left lane. The other students were also distracted by us, so they were unable to warn me like they did last time. I slowed down my bus, causing the cruiser to start passing me, intending to do a pit maneuver once it was in position. But what I saw in the cab will haunt me forever. I used to enjoy camping. It was always a fun, exciting adventure for me and my family. That is, until one trip. It was a Monday. We planned on spending the whole week camping in some campgrounds we found 2 hours away from here. By around 6 a.m., I had woken up the kids and my wife and loaded up the truck. It was a good 30 degrees considering it was in Colorado. Once everyone was loaded up, we began our 2-hour drive to our campgrounds. 3 hours later, we just now arrived. Traffic was heavier when we passed by the city, causing a delay time. However, once we were finally settled into our zone, we could finally relax and stretch our legs. The day went on fine, nothing out of the ordinary. When it came to dusk, though, things began to get strange. The birds almost went totally silent. In fact, everything went silent. Awfully quiet when you're in the woods in a canyon where you should be hearing everything. We thought nothing of it and brushed it off as a quiet night. However, our attitude changed when we started hearing hasty, moderate-sized footsteps across our campground. Again, being the skeptical man that I am, I pushed it off as being a deer or a raccoon collecting some leftover food. Though, gradually, it became to be very tedious constantly hearing footsteps. I went to confront this animal and scare it away, so I began unzipping my tent. As expected, the footsteps scampered off into the forest again, so I decided to go to sleep. That same night, I woke up to a weird glow coming from the right side of my tent. I didn't have my glasses, and it was pitch black outside, so all I could do was intently stare at that glow and see if I can figure out what it was. That's when it hit me. Fear, terror. I could now distinctly make out the shadowy figure of a person crouched down aside my tent with a lantern. It looked as if he was making a stretched out smile, staring at me. I was totally terrified, frozen in fear. My heart racing so fast I could barely hold in my tears. Me being 29 may make me look like a wimp, but you would react the same way. I had to just close my eyes and pray that this human or thing didn't harm me or my family. I locked my eyes shut, sweat all over me, and just waited to fall asleep. I had to try even with the feeling, not just the feeling, the reality of being watched. The next morning I woke up. I immediately woke up my wife, grabbed the kids, and rushed them to the truck. Screw packing up, I didn't care. I ran over to the car. Just as I reached it, I realized something. Our tires had been slashed. My heart dropped. Honestly, I jumped when my son asked what's wrong. My wife was panicking too. We rushed back to the campsite, knowing we had some tape and a pump somewhere. We were planning to inflate a raft and go rafting a bit, and we always bring tape in case our raft breaks. We searched and searched before we finally found it. We ran over to the car again, carrying our stuff. Keep in mind, this is a mere 20 minutes since we left our car's slashed tires. When I got there for the second time, my heart dropped. Our car had the words, "You can't hide, you can't run," smeared in black charcoal on it. I was terrified. We all were. I packed my kids in and fixed up the tires. It wasn't the best, but I didn't care. I drove only 21 miles before we ran out of gas. I suppose I can with low gas, and I didn't bring extra. I was furious, yet I felt safe knowing that we were now 21 miles away. I called my buddy from work, who lives 62 miles away, to come pick us up, but since it was getting dark, we'd have to stay the rest of the night. I armed myself with a Glock and had it ready. Eventually, though, where I failed as a person, I fell asleep. I woke up to light tapping on the window, and I was so terrified I didn't open my eyes. As soon as I opened them, my soul left my body. I was filled with utter fear. There was a totally bald, pale male with a wide grin smiling at me, holding a lantern. His eyelids were held back with pins and needles. I grabbed my gun, and he darted off at what felt like lightning speeds. I immediately woke my family up and had them all awake. Finally, 15 minutes later, my buddy showed up. We gunned it out of there. I don't know who or what that was. All I know is I hope me and my family never have to see it again. The trouble started with the arrival of the gypsy camp on the top of the hill, overlooking our tract mansion neighborhood. The authorities couldn't make them leave. The area was a designated campground built on a former cemetery, and the gypsies were the best customers they'd had in a long time. The Parks and Recreation Department just wanted their transient occupation fees. The police said the gypsies weren't breaking any laws, so there they stayed. One of their sources of income was an ice cream truck, plying our neighborhood every day, blaring its unearthly nomad jingle. The health department found no problems. It passed all sanitation tests by wide margins. The motor vehicle department said it was licensed and well maintained. They even noted its engine's lack of leaks, so it was allowed to prowl our little slice of heaven, weirding up the ambiance. The worst part was the ice cream man, a handsome, swarthy lad with flowing long hair, flamboyant clothes, and shiny gold chains. Not the sort of man we wanted anywhere near our wives. We gave them perfectly secure lives, wanting for nothing, paid for by our ceaseless labor. But that wasn't enough. They wanted excitement too, like they had enjoyed in their sorority days gone by, and the ice cream man seemed to provide it for them. Given our long hours, we'd only see him on the weekends, following our giddy womenfolk to the street so they could fawn over his wares. It was clear they were interested in more than just ice cream. We tried his products, of course. They were good, but no more, just good. Our wives acted like it was the best treat they'd ever tasted, and he was just as friendly with us as he was with our women. No apparent sign of favoritism. But we just didn't trust him. No good can come from someone that handsome spending time with our ladies. And the eerie pendant he wore, a teardrop-shaped amulet containing several small gold rings, some filled with shiny jewels. He said it was meant to represent the night sky. The long tear-shaped jewel inset among the rings was meant to symbolize the moon, and made from fluorite. He said it was a highly protective and stabilizing stone used to ground and harmonize spiritual energy. It felt more like a mystic eye, one which seemed to peer right through us, stripping of us our secrets. We devoutly hoped it was giving him skeletal fluorosis. Most of the fellows worked in the neighborhood in a 3-story office building for a business we formed after graduating from State University. We couldn't see many details of our neighborhood from there, but we could hear the cloying sound of the ice cream truck's vagabond melody every weekday, right around 11 o'clock. The Pied Piper area luring our damsels away to pass the time with him unsupervised. We smoldered with rage every time it wafted our way. We imagined our ladies swooning to his lavender-heavy cologne. Our fraternity had run into some trouble with gypsies back in their college days, and not surprisingly, it involved the women from our favorite sorority. We were younger then, and the fire in our bellies burned hotter, and aided by an antebellum intolerance of our outsiders' population at the time, we dealt with the threat simply and directly. But we were older now, and more respectable, not eager for a rematch. They kept it hidden from us for a long time, but eventually we noticed. Each of our wives had a pendant, just like the ice cream man's. Their gems came in different colors though, some green, some brown, but most of them a piercing, radiant blue. To no one's surprise, they had bought them from the gypsies. One of the old crones was a talented jeweler. And of course, the ice cream man had sold them. We asked how long they owned these pendants, but eerily noted that each one of them had given a vague answer. It seemed we were losing our dames to these itinerant invaders. We commiserated with each other over lunch one day, wondering what we could do about this. One of the guys brought up a disturbing development. He had discovered a few sets of clothes buried in the back of his closet. One looked like a construction worker's outfit, one was a ballroom dancing tuxedo, and the third was a dead ringer for the ice cream man's pretentious ensemble. He confronted his wife about them, and she had claimed they were fancy outfits for him, something she was going to surprise him with on Valentine's Day. He had been willing to accept that explanation, but when he tried them on, none of them fit. They seemed cut for someone with the build of that swashbuckling peacock. When he demanded to know whose they really were, she wouldn't answer him. The thought sent chills down our spines. That night, each of us searched our closets and found the same thing. Fancy outfits, the themes differing, but the sizes identical. We all got evasive answers about their purpose, but it seemed crystal clear to us. The next day at work, we planned our revenge. That evening, we marched in lockstep to the top of the hill towards the gypsy campground. The setting sun gave the area a warm, arcane glow. We entered unopposed. Several children stopped playing and stared straight at us, unmoving. They continued to stare at us as we approached the ice cream truck, parked off to the side. We heard the clanking of metal and the buzzing of a socket wrench coming from under the vehicle. I rapped the side with my club, and who should appear from underneath but the ice cream man himself, wearing oil-stained overalls. He smiled and greeted us with his usual friendly demeanor. Curse him, he even made those filthy overalls look good. We grabbed him by his long hair, yanked him to his feet, and slammed him against the side of the truck. His eyes opened wide with terror as we beat him to death. When his empty husk crumbled at our feet, his eyes remained frozen in that expression. The scene around us was chaos. Children screamed, women wailed, and old men cowered. I guess our old fraternity still had the commanding presence that struck fear into unworthy outsiders. We returned home in triumph. The next day overflowed with turmoil. Of course, the migrants told the police what we had done, and the officers were obligated to talk to us about it. But two things worked in our favor. 1, the chief of police was an old fraternity brother. 2, the gypsies were unable to produce a body. Our buddy in blue politely informed them he couldn't charge anyone with murder unless there was a body, and given the circumstances, it seemed like it should have been easy to produce one. The gypsies exploded into a furious pandemonium. One old crone confronted me directly and swore vengeance for the death of her husband. I laughed right in her face. What would a handsome young guy like him want with an old hag like her? The laughter from my mates nearly drowned out their caterwauling, and with that, it was over. Unsettlingly, our wives didn't seem the least bit disturbed by the ice cream man's fate. We expected them to be upset by the death of their secret lover, but they showed no signs of that. Did we have it wrong? Had we just killed an innocent man? No matter, we'd been let off the hook, and at least that obnoxious tune was silenced forever. The gypsy camp was quite busy that night. We assumed it was the funeral. They arranged themselves in various overlapping circles, doing some sort of dance under the light of the full moon. They certainly carried on until the wee hours of the morning. I figured, let them have their stupid ceremony. It was a lazy autumn Friday, and we had gathered in our company's lunchroom as usual. One of my mates had a disturbing story from the night before. He had tried to throw out the fantasy outfits. He figured there was no need for them anymore. But his wife was quite strident about keeping them. When he persisted, she became downright hysterical, and so he backed off. This reaction confused the rest of us too. But then the boss made a disquieting observation. What if those hadn't been the ice cream man's clothes? What if there were more men like that in the sprawling camp? It's not like we had gone looking for more. We had just focused on the ice cream man and hadn't really searched the place during our sojourn. We uneasily finished the lunches our gals had packed for us. Around 2 o'clock, the boss summoned us for an unannounced meeting. He said he was cutting us loose for the rest of the day. If we hoped to catch our lasses with the wearers of those outfits, we'd have to surprise them. So we left work early, determined to answer this question once and for all. We all had a bad feeling about this, but resolved that there was no other choice. It was only a few blocks hike back to our homes, best not to tip the girls off with the noise from our cars. The streets in our neighborhood was eerily silent. Even the birds seemed to have left. I approached my house quietly, trying to stealthily unlock the front door. A sudden screech to my right jolted me. My head whirled to the side. Our cat stared back up at me and meowed plaintively. I muttered under my breath about the stupid cat as I finished unlocking the door. Once I had it closed quietly behind me, I could hear noises from upstairs. As I crept up the stairway, I could hear the sound of my wife's happy giggling. As I approached my open bedroom door, I shuddered as I heard happy groans from a distinctively male voice. My blood boiling over, I grabbed my loaded pistol from my study and stormed into my bedroom. And there lay my wife, on our bed, completely naked, in the arms of a strapping young gypsy lad, easily 10 years her junior. They looked at me with surprise, his piercing blue eyes almost stopping me cold. My wrath flaring, I emptied my pistol on them, their bodies shaking with the force of the impacts. As the noise died down, their crumpled forms continued to lay there, the lifeblood pouring out of that unfaithful betrayer. I smirked and headed outside. The rest of my pals were there too. Each told a similar story of finding their wives with another man, one who fit the fancy outfits. Most had been found in bed, but a few were found in the living room, dancing to the phonograph. We congratulated each other. Finally, it was over. A roar of engines shattered the quiet. The police surrounded us from all directions, leaping from their cars and drawing their weapons. We all raised our hands compliantly. None of us had been stupid enough to bring our firearms with us, and besides, the evidence of our justifiable homicide was waiting inside. We swaggered confidently as the police entered our homes to look at our handiwork. A few minutes passed. We started to plan a huge celebration to mark the happy occasion, where we could finally bring our longtime mistresses out of the shadows. But when the police emerged, they put us all in handcuffs. All they had found were the perforated corpses of those two-timers, but no one else in there. Although there were clusters of bullet holes in the nearby walls, as if we had been firing at something else. Aghast, our faces fell. What had just happened to us? Glumly, we let the police lead us to their waiting squad cars. A twee song slowly drifted through the air, gently pushing aside the silence. We lifted our heads and, stupefied, noticed the ice cream truck driving slowly down the street. As it reached my house, the side panel lifted up, and standing behind the counter was the ice cream man, as alive as he ever was. He picked up a frozen chocolate banana, the crushed nuts on the outside making it look like a French tickler. He held it up in my direction and smiled broadly, not a single trace of malice on his face. The full moon rose a full month later, as expected. A great circle of womanhood stood on top of the hill in a large clearing inside the gypsy camp. It was the disloyal wives of the neighborhood, none the worse for wear. Their white nightgowns and placid expressions on their faces were easily visible in the moon glow. The old crone stood in the middle, praying over a coffin on the altar. It contained the remains of her dead husband, his life taken years ago by a bunch of prejudiced fraternity men. As her ritual ended, she raised her hands slowly in the air, holding a night sky pendant. Each of the women did the same. The light shining through the gemstone traced a line in their bodies as it rose. When it reached their foreheads, the glow intensified greatly. As it faded, a handsome young man in fantasy clothing stood before each of them, smiling warmly, his eyes the color of their pendant stone. The maidens returned their warm smiles as each man took his lady's hands in his. They slowly walked through the camp, eyes locked on each other, and their bodies slowly fading from view as each woman reached a tombstone with her name on it. I watched all of this from some distance, in the derelict remains of the old neighborhood. After the violent incident of 2 decades prior, it became a twisted and haunted place, as the subdivision was slowly abandoned and left to rot. Paint had peeled from the houses and sheets, undisturbed by the wind. Shingles slid from the roofs and covered the ground like leaves. The lawns and gardens, long since scorched into dust, showed no signs of gophers or any other vermin. I used to live in one of these houses. I ended up in an orphanage after my father had been arrested for my mother's murder. The shock of finding all those bullet holes and bloodstains sent me into a downward spiral. I ended up in a mental institution after aging out of the foster care system. This was the first time I had set foot outside of a government facility in almost 10 years. I didn't know if coming here would bring closure, but I had no other ideas. Seeing the ghosts of the past play out their melodramatic theater production gave me answers, but no comfort. I shivered as a cold wind blew, then turned around and began trudging up the hill. The abandoned campground was once again a cemetery, now overgrown and neglected. It seemed the entire area was no longer good for anything but cloistering the ghosts of the past. The ground in the center of the cemetery moved slightly. A small amount of dirt began to sink into the earth. Without warning, A gnarled old hand burst from the soil, clawing at the empty air. Hey friends, thanks for joining me today for Horror Time Story Time. If you enjoyed today's video, please go ahead and leave me a thumbs up down below. Comment what you liked about it if you would like, or if you have a story that you would like to share, go ahead and send that to me at reisnernails@outlook.com, and I'd be happy to put that in the next video. So until then, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I will see you guys in the next one.